Okay, so you know that the Ramah in the beginning of Siman Tov Chav Tes, the Siman that teaches us about Shoyalim V'Dorshin, B'Inyonei HaChag, Shloishim Yoim, Lifnei HaChag, the Ramah says, V'Noihagim Laharbois Ktsas Ba'achilu Ushtia B'Yoim Achar HaChag V'Hu Isru Chag. The Ramah, before we even begin the halachas of Erev Pesach and Pesach, the Ramah teaches us that the day after Pesach, the minig is to be marbe ba'achila ushtia, and this is referred to as Isru Chag, l'chore, the time and place for Isru Chag is the day after. It should appear in the Shulchan Aruch after the halachas of Pesach, not before. You know, this concept of Isru Chag comes from the pasuk that we say in Hallel, Isru Chag ba'avosim ad karnois hamizbeach. The pasuk has a pashut pshat, as Rashi says. Isru Chag means that we bind the chagige, the korbanos hachag, ba'avosim with cords, ad karnois hamizbeach, until we will bring them to the mizbeach. Rashi says, Hasvachim v'hachagigos shehoyu nikiim uvdukim mimun koishrin bekare mitoiseyem, just like we did in Mitzrayim, ad sheyevium bekarnois hamizbeach. So in this, according to this pshat, chag means the chagig, the korbanos hachag, and we tie them until we bring them to the mizbeach. But the Gemara in Sukkah has another pshat. The Gemara says, Omer Reb Yirmiyah mishum Reb Shimon bar Yochai, kol ha'oise isur lechag ba'achila ushtia, mala olav hakosov kilu bona mizbeach v'hikriv olav korban. According to this pshat, chag is the yontiv itself. Chag is not the korbanos of the yontiv, but chag is the yontiv. And we tie the yontiv by, what does it mean? We tie the yontiv to the days after. And how do we tie that? We symbolically tie the yontiv to the days after by making a suda on the day after yontiv. Isru chag ba'avosim. Ad karnei samizbeach. By doing that, it's considered ad. It's such a big madrege that it's considered ad kedei kach, as if we would be bona mizbeach v'hikriv olav korban, which means that every yomtiv is not just for the here and now, but the yomtiv is meant to have a long-lasting impression on us, and by symbolically acting that out by the Suda of Isru Chag, we remind ourselves of the fact that the message of the Yontiv and the lessons of the Yontiv need to be taken along with us b'meshech kol yemais hashana. Vaistos that the Ramah holds that even according to this pshat, it's also something that happens before. In other words, just like in the Pashat pshat, that Isru Chag means tying the carbon, it's before Yom Tov. So also, according to this pshat, one needs to be aware before he enters the Yom Tov that the Yom Tov is not just for the here and now, but the Yom Tov is something that's meant to have a long-lasting impression on us. And only if before Yom Tov we already understand that, will we be able to experience the Yom Tov in such a way. You know, the Rambam in his caption for Sefer Hasmanim, the Rambam always has a pasuk in the beginning of each Sefer. The pasuk that the Rambam quotes is Nochalti eit voisecha la'olam ki sesoin li bihema, which means Nochalti eit voisecha, that your Torah I have taken as my heritage, the testimonies of your Torah, eit voisecha, the testimonies of your Torah I've taken as a heritage, ki sesoin li bihema, because they're the joy of my heart. So the Sefer Hasmanim as the Maggid Mishnah says, is a sefer about the mitzvahs that are totally in Zman. But these mitzvahs that are totally in Zman, the way to learn them and the way to do them is that it should be in an oifen of nachalti eit voisecha la'olam. It shouldn't just be for during the Yom Tov. It should be something that's forever, something that nachalti eit voisecha la'olam kisesoin li behema, obviously only if it's experienced in a positive way, in a pleasant way. Then is it something that we want to remember and something that we want to hold on to? So it's nachalti eit voisecha la'olam kisesoin li behema. So it needs to be, as the pasuk says, l'chu vonim shimu li yiras Hashem alametchem. That even when the bonim are l'chu, still shimu li, they still hear the lessons that they were taught. So how do we connect in the right way to the Yom Tov? How do we make sure that we take along with us the lessons of the Yom Tov? You know, there are 2 nights of the year that stand out. Every Yid experiences something very special. We feel like we're touching on something that's larger than life, the way we live it on a daily basis. And that's the night of Kol Nidre and the night of the Seder. It could be that, therefore, we wear a kittel both these nights because that's what we wear, you know, as we journey beyond. And these are times when we connect with something that's otherworldly, something that's beyond. But the focus is different, you know. On Yom Kippur, we focus on the past year, what we did, if it was something that we shouldn't have done, what we didn't do, if it was something that we should have done. We make a personal cheshbon hanefesh. On the other hand, on the night of the Seder, the emphasis is on being part of a nation, part of a people. And what we're dealing with is not last year and not the year before, but we're dealing with the entire history of our people from the beginning. Yom Kippur is more a time of ein ani li mili, and Pesach is more of a time of kishani la'atzmi mo'ani. It's only that we're part of, we belong to a people that has a history and a destiny. We all know that Pesach is a time for instilling emunah in ourselves, transmitting emunah to our children. And therefore, it's not enough that kulonu chachamim, kulonu nevoinim, kulonu yoidim es Torah. We also need to have the mitzvah aleinu l'saper. We have to connect to the story of the Jewish people. And unfortunately, it's possible that a Yid learns, davens, observes the mitzvahs, and he's not connected to the story. And I think that more than ever, the importance of connecting to the story of our people can't be over-exaggerated, and it shouldn't be underestimated, because we live in a time when, people are more and more citizens of the world, and people also have a tendency to just live the now, live the moment, and you could even have a Yid that's Shema Mitzvahs, but he's culturally assimilated. Years ago, even Yidden that weren't Shomer Torah mitzvahs felt a deep connection to our people. And today, unfortunately, even Yidden that are Shomer Torah mitzvahs sometimes lack that deep feeling of connection, that it should be, that we should care we should care about other Yidden and we should feel part of other Yidden. And that's also very much connected with our emunah. The mitzvah aleinu l'saper b'yitzias Mitzrayim, because our relationship with the Rebbeinu Shalom is communal. Elokim nitzav ba'adas keil. The Rebbeinu Shalom identifies himself to us in the Aseres Adibris as Anoichi Hashem Eloikecha Asher Hoitzeisicha Me'eretz Mitzrayim. And we all know that Yitzias Mitzrayim is considered the Omud Chazak Be'emunaseinu, as the Chinuch says. So you know that the Ibn Ezra already brings on the pasuk Anoichi Hashem Eloikecha Asher Hoitzeisicha Me'eretz Mitzrayim. The Ibn Ezra says She'olonu Rabbi Yehuda Halevi Menuchasei Kavod Lama Hizkir Anoichi Hashem Elokecha Asher Hitzisicha V'lo Yomar She'asisi Shamayim V'Haaretz V'ani Asisicha. I mean, creation is a much bigger deal l'chayre than Yitzias Mitzrayim. So the Ibn Ezra has his way of answering this question, but in the Rabbi Yehuda Halevi himself in the Kuzari writes as follows: Omar Moshe bePesach dvorov bedabrei el paroi Elokei ha'ivri im shlochani elecha ritzoynoi loymar Elokei Avraham Yitzchak v'Yaakov. Why? Ki hoya dvar ha'avos mefursim az be'umois v'noida ki ha'inyan ha'Eloki nischaber imam v'hishgiach aleim v'asal lahem neflois. V'lachein lo yomar lo Moshe lefaroi Elokei hashamayim v'ha'aretz shlochani elecha. But he says, Elokei Ivriim. Then he says, V'chein posach ha'Eloka b'dvoroi el kol adas b'nei Yisrael. Onoichi Hashem Elokecha asher yitzisicha me'eretz Mitzrayim. V'lo yomar, ani boirei ha'olam uvarachem. And he says, and so also I spoke to you, the Sarah Kuzorim. And he says, and that's because this was the Mechayev as Kol Am Yisrael, Davar shenisbarer lebnei Yisrael barishona al pira oisei nehem, something that they saw with their own eyes. V'achar kach nimsar leish mipi ish bekabola hadoyma lemar einai. In other words, Brias Oilam, none of us witnessed, whereas Yitzias Mitzrayim, Shishim Riboy Mi Yisrael witnessed, and they told their children who told their children, and therefore it's a more meaningful mechayiv. In other words, it enables us to verify the truth of this information, and therefore this is being mentioned and not Bria Shemayim Varetz. But you know that a lot of time passed since Yitzias Mitzrayim, and it doesn't seem like we really feel that Yitzias Mitzrayim is something that we einenu ro v'lo zor, and that the Kabbalah midor dor is so clear and so perfect. I mean, in many cases the links became weak. I mean, so how do we actually have the foundation of Yitzias Mitzrayim in our life, which the Kuzari says is the foundation of Yiddishkeit? I mean, how do we make that relevant? I mean, we do every day talk about Yitzias Mitzrayim over and over again. We talk about the Avos, we talk about the entire Jewish past, but are we really connected? Does it have a meaningful presence in our life? And this is really a serious issue. It's I say what we need to take away from Pesach is not like Vertlach, a kasha and a teretz on the kasha and a kasha on the teretz. We really have to deal with the core message of Zeicher Yitzias Mitzrayim, of Sipur Yitzias Mitzrayim, L'man tesaper ba'oznei bincha uven bincha v'yedatem ki ani Hashem. I mean, how do we make that part of our life? So, you know, the Rashba in Brachas Daf Yud Beis talks about the Shita of Ben Zayman, who says that Ein Maskirin Yitzias Mitzrayim L'Yimois HaMashiach, that in Yimois HaMashiach we will not mention Yitzias Mitzrayim. Ben Zayman bases himself on the pasuk in Yirmiyah that says, Hine Yomim Ba'im Ne'um Hashem, V'lo yoimru oid. Chai Hashem asher helos b'nei Yisrael me'eretz Mitzrayim. They will no longer say, Chai Hashem asher helos Yisrael me'eretz Mitzrayim. What will they say? Ki'im. Chai Hashem asher helo v'asher hevi azera beis Yisrael me'eretz Sofoino u'mikol ha'arotzois asher hidachtim shom v'yoshvu ad Moshe. So they'll talk about the nisim of the Geula from this Golus. But they'll no longer talk about Yetzias Mitzrayim. So the Rashba says, where he's talking about the fact that Torah zu lo tehei muchlefes, there'll be no change in the Torah, no mitzvah will become batel asid lavai. He says, V'im titoin oleinu mi bittul kriya shma, ratzaloi mi Yetzias Mitzrayim, shehi mitzvah mi mitzvahs ha-Torah. So how could Ben Zayma say that in Yemaisa Mashiach we will not be Maskir Yetzias Mitzrayim? So he says, Da, she'ena kavona b'mitzvah zechiras Yetzias Mitzrayim, elo shenizkor b'peh hanisim she'osa lanu Hashem yizbarach she'yitzionu mi'Mitzrayim, achar heyoiseinu dalei hakoyach, v'tacha sivlois melech v'am kosher, v'im haschiro hazois, nikva b'nafsheisenu. What's the purpose of this remembering? Shehu ha-mashgiach, v'hayochol, שלא ימנעהו שום מונע שבשום צד, ואוי שתסחזק בנפשנו מידס הביטחון, etc. Now he says, ותהיה הכוונה ההיא יויסר חזוקה באויסס יויסר חזוקה. In other words, that by mentioning the Geula from this Golus, that kavana of Schiras Yetzias Mitzrayim will be served in a greater way. Hatachlis ahu shomur Bahazkirenu kibbutz am memushoch umemoirot me'amim noiroim min ha'arotzos ha'rechoikos u'mitzofeinu miyam. That when we'll be talking about kibbutz Goliath of Liyasid Lavai, that's a much greater kiyum, says the Rashba, of Schiras Yetzias Mitzrayim. It's not a bittul of the mitzvah of Schiras Yetzias Mitzrayim, but it's a much greater kiyum of that mitzvah. So that's talking about the Geula HaAsida. But it's not just the Geula HaAsida, because it's true that the kibbutz of the Am Memushach U'Memoireth Me'amim Neiroim, let's say, is a greater miracle than Yetzias Mitzrayim. But there's another ongoing miracle in Jewish survival and revival throughout the Golus. As the Chovos HaLevavis in the Shar HaBchina, Perek Hey says, the greatest toivus that HaKadosh Baruch Hu was native to people. And the strong proof on the Boire, he had Torah Hanasuna L'Moshe Nevi'oi, the Heirois Ha'oisois Al Yodoi, the Shanois HaMinhagim V'Hatvoim, the Heirois HaMoifsim HaNoiroim Kidei V'Hamin Boire Yizbarach Hu Banov. Says the Chovos HaLevavis, okay, but that happened a long time ago. What do we have now? Says the Chovos HaLevavis, V'im yevakesh odam bazman hazeh, lirois, mashu doime, le'inyonim aheim. If a person wants to see in our time, says the Chovos HaLevavis almost 1,000 years ago, wants to see in our time something that's doime le'inyonim aheim, something that can be compared somehow to Yetzias Mitzrayim. He says, Yabit be'ein ha'emes. He should take an honest look. Deinu bein ha'umas me'eis ha'golus. Our survival bein ha'umas. Me'eis ha'golus. V'sidur in yoneinu beinehem. How we exist between the goyim. Im masha onu bilti maskimim imohem. B'seiser u'bagolu. We don't agree with them. We don't go along with them. The hein yoidois bazeh. The umas oilam know that we're not on the same page. And he says, V'yireh, if a person takes an honest look, he will see. Ki in yoneinu, efsher sheyeh korov me in yoneim b'mezoynes u'betrofim. That as far as having what to eat, as far as financial security, I mean, it's korov me in yoneim. We're not much worse off than the goyim, he says. The efsher sheyeh toiv me in yoneim. And sometimes it's even better. When there are wars. V'tireh, Now he says another thing, V'tira habeinoinim v'hakifriim shebohem, that the middle class, the Goyish middle class, Torchim yoiser mehabeinoinim shebon. They work harder to make a living. V'dalim asher b'kibeinu. And even harder than the dalim asher b'kibeinu. K'moy shiftichanu yoitzreinu yizbarach. V'av gam zoitz be'yoisam be'eretz oivehem. Loi ma'astim. V'loi ga'altim l'chaloisam l'hofer brisi itam. So we can find the kiyum of the bris, of the covenant, even in the matzav of Golus. Says the Chovis Alvavis, and he says that is how one can find Bizman Hazeh, Mashu Doime Le'inyonim Ahim. Something that's Doime to Yitzias Mitzrayim. V'omar Ezra ki avodim anachnu u'ba'avduseinu lo yazavonu elokeinu. V'nema lulei Hashem shahoy olonu b'kum aleinu adam v'shar ha'mizmar. There's also a Ramban in Parashas Kisavoy that when he's talking about the Teichecho, he says, Aval achar heyoiseinu begolus, that all those harsh punishments are that will be exiled. Aval achar heyoiseinu begolus, ba'aretz oisoiveinu loy niskalalu ma'aseh yodeinu, v'loy alofeinu v'ashterois tzoineinu, v'loy karmeinu v'zeiseinu v'asher nizra basodeh. Aval anachnu ba'arotzes k'shar ha'amim yoshvei oretz. Oy batoiv mehen. Sometimes we're even better off than the Shar Ha'amim, says the Ramban. Sharacham aleinu. So, l'chora, we can say that according to the Rashba, not only talking about the future Geula, when it will take place, is a kiyum of Schiras Yetzias Mitzrayim, but also, as we see in the Chovos HaLevavos, just reflecting on the nace of the kiyum of Klal Yisrael throughout the Golus is also a way to connect with, to be mazkir Yetzias Mitzrayim, to be mazkir Yetzias Mitzrayim. You know, the Rabbeinu Bachye writes that in his time. The Rabbi Yaakov Emden in the Hakdama to Siddur writes, Umi ha'iveh, who's the blind man? Who doesn't see the connection of the lower world to the upper world. In other words, who's blind and doesn't see that there's something beyond the visible and tangible. Hasoymech umamid ve'eni hashgochosei aleihem tomid ve'ech lo yevosh hakoife ba'ashgoche v'yamud nichlom mishi ya'ayin beyichud in yonenu uma'amodenu ba'olam. Anybody that will be ma'ayin in our unique maimed in this world. Anachnu ha'umah ha'gdoila se bezura achar kol ma she'over aleinu me'atzorois v'atmurois alofim me'ashonim ve'ein umah ba'olam nirdefes kamoinu. No nation was persecuted like the Jewish people. Ma rabim hoyu tzoreinu ma otzmu nosu roish hakomim aleinu minureinu lahashmideinu laokreinu l'shorshenu mipnei hasineh shesibasa hakina. So also you see a Jewish way that we know how to twist it in a positive way. Yeah, the sinner, the reason for the sinner is the kinna. Rabas Sararunu gam lo yochlu lanu la abdeinu lechaloisenu kol ha'umois hakdumois ha'atzumois avad zichrom botol sivrom sor tzilom v'onu adveikim b'Hashem Elokeinu kulonu chayim ayoin lo nifkav mimenu b'chol toikef arichas kolusenu afilo ois v'nikud echad me'atorah shebeksav and lo sholat b'hem yad azman v'lo kilom ma yanef philosoph charif. Yeah, an astute philosopher. What can he answer? Hayad hamikra osas kolela. Could this be a coincidence? Chei nafshi ki behizbainini b'nefloi seila. Godlu etzli yosem mikol nisim v'nefloi she'os Hashem yisborach lavisenu b'Mitzrayim u'b'midbar b'Eretz Yisrael. V'chol she'orach hagolus yosem is ames hanes v'noida maaseh tokvay u'gvurosei. So this is how I think we can instill in ourselves the emunah, that Omud Chazak of Geulas Mitzrayim, Nisei Mitzrayim. Because if we just talk about about what was thousands of years ago, it's really difficult to relate to connect to. And that's why we say, Vehi, Sha'amdo ala aveiseinu, Velonu, Shelo echad bilvad amad aleinu l'chaloiseinu, Shebechol dor vador, oimdim aleinu l'chaloiseinu, v'HaKadosh Baruch Hu matzilenu miyodom, and bechol dor vador chayim vadom liris es atzmai, kilu hu yotza mimitzrayim. So it's really about making it actual, making it real, making it meaningful to us on our level and in our time. And Mamela, and an important part of this is really, I mean, experiencing ourselves as Yidden. I mean, we become so fargoyished and we lose our identity, our sense of peoplehood, our sense of belonging to the Klal Yisrael and to the Shalshelas Hadoros, experiencing ourselves as a link in a long chain of Yidden that held on to our tradition and that carried the banner of Kvod Shamayim, and not to become lost in the here and now and all the pettiness, but to see the big picture and to live Jewish history. And that's why it's not enough to be Chachamim, Nevonim, and Yoidim Esatorah, but the mitzvah aleinu l'saper, we have to tell the story, because the story is really the shorish of who we are. And you know, what do we say to the Ben Rasha? He says, Ma avoida azois lochem. So he doesn't want to be part of the avoida. But what do we say to him? We say, Lefi shahoitzi atzvei min haklal kafar be'eker. It's not because he doesn't want to do the mitzvahs. He doesn't want to do the mitzvahs. That's a serious problem, but that's not the problem. The problem is that by saying lochem, he's not only saying that he doesn't want to do the mitzvahs, he doesn't want to do the avodah azois, but he's separating himself from the klal. And if one is not part of our people, he's disconnected, and he loses his kesher to the Rabbeinu Shalom. And Mamela, the Hepech of Hoitzi Atzvei Min HaKlal is really instilling within ourselves the sense of being part of the Atov V'Chartonu Mikol Ha'amim, Ahavta Yison V'Ratzisa Bon V'Remamtonu Mikol HaLashonis. And I know in today's day and age, it's almost embarrassing to believe in our chosenness, but you know what? It's not embarrassing at all. It's irrational. No, it's irrational that we're here. I mean, just like nobody can explain why we're here, there is no better explanation for why and how we're here besides for the Atah B'Chartonu Mikol Ha'amim. So it's irrational not to accept that. The most rational explanation to how we are still here is the Atah V'Chartonu Mikol Ha'amim. So Memela, we say every day in the Shemoneh Esrei, we say Elokeinu, Elokei Aviseinu, Elokei Avram, Elokei Yitzchak, Elokei Yaakov. The Mabit says in the Beis Elokim that Aviseinu is not Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, because we spell it out. Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. He says Aviseinu means my parents, my parents' parents, my parents' parents' parents, all the way back to Avram Avinu. We have to see ourselves. What's our shaykhis to Elokeinu? What's our shaykhis to the Rabbeinu Shalom? The shaykhis is through the long link of generations, father to son, v'yigada to levincha b'yoyim ahu leimor. That's our connection. Elokeinu v'Elokei Aviseinu, and every yid today that comes to the Seder, and even if he doesn't come to the Seder, any yid that knows that he's a yid, in his veins there's blood of Mesiras Nefesh, because so many Yidden opted out 1,000 years ago, 2,000 years ago, 500 years ago, 200 years ago, and their offspring no longer knows even to be upset about being Jewish. So the pshat is that the Aviseinu, that's our connection to the Elokei Avram, to the Elokei Yitzchak, and the Elokei Yaakov. And we say, Ve'emunah kol zois v'kayom oleinu, ki hu Hashem Elokeinu, ve'ein zu losai, ve'anachnu Yisrael amoi, hapoideinu miyad melachim, malkeinu agoy aleinu mikaf kol haritzim. So what's our emunah kol zeis? It's two things. One is that God is great. The other thing that we are great. We are great and we are chosen. That's part of the emunah. And how do we see it? We see it in the fact that we see it in the fact that we're still here to tell the story. And that's the yesod of the emunah kol zois. And Mamela, I think that this is an important message that we should try to focus on in this manche ruseinu, and something that we can take along. I mean, for the yomim haboim likraseinu l'sholom. You know, vayotzienu b'toichem l'cheirus olam. It sounds a bit sarcastic because since then we've been persecuted over and over again. So where's the cheirus olam, eternal liberty? But in a sense, you know, I say the matzah, we say, Holach mo'anyo diacholu avasona ba'ardim Mitzrayim. What's acholu avasona ba'ardim Mitzrayim? The Orchis Chaim brings in the name of the Ibn Ezra, who said that when he was in jail in India, they fed them matzahs because it takes longer to digest, and therefore it gives a feeling of being full for a longer time. And therefore he says, probably the Mitzrayim fed us matzah. So it's lachma anyo, it's the bread of affliction. It's the poor man's bread that we ate in Mitzrayim. The Ramban also says that in Parshas Re'eh, the Ramban says, he says that the Sforno says, Lo yisoichel olav chametz shivas yom teichel olav lechem oini, lechem shehoyu oichlim ba'oini v'sheloi hoyo lehem pnai lahashes isosam ache hachametz ache techmatz mipnei noiksim otzim. In other words, that in Mitzrayim we never had a chance to have the yeast rise because we were so busy working. We never were able to eat bread. We only ate matzah. And the pasuk says in Parshas Re'eh, Lechem Oini, Ki b'chipazon yotzasem eretz Mitzrayim. So, is it Lechem Oini or is it Ki b'chipazon yotzasem eretz Mitzrayim? The Ramban says, Ubir bekan dvarim rabim, hiskei b'matzah sh'tiyah Lechem Oini, lahagid ki tziva liskar sheyotzu b'chipazon, v'hu Oini, zeiche ki hoyu b'Mitzrayim b'lechem tzar u'mayim lachatz, v'hinei tirmois l'shnei dvarim. So the Ramban says that the matzah, as we know, is also a bread of redemption and also a bread of oini, of affliction. Because during the 210 years that we lived in Mitzrayim, we were eating matzah. And when we left, we once again were eating matzah, but for a different reason. Because so it's interesting that the Rebbeinu Shalom set things up in a way that on the day that we left Mitzrayim, when we finally l'choreh should be allowed to eat bread, we continue to eat matzah for a different reason. Probably the message is that redemption is not so much about the change in objective circumstances as in the change of attitude. In other words, yeah, we were eating the same bread, but it took on a totally different meaning. The same matzah, you know, it has two sides. One side is the side of oini, and the other side is the sign of geula. The same matzah was transformed from being a bread of affliction into a bread of redemption. You know, as I always like to repeat the story with the Baal Shem Tov and the water carrier that in Mezhebish, the Baal Shem Tov was on his way to davening and he sees Zelig, the water carrier, that was an older man and carrying the pails of water, and he asks him, Zelig, good morning, how are you? So he says, Rebbe, you really want to know? You really want to know? It's terrible. You know, I'm getting old. I don't have the koiches that I used to have, and I'm still schlepping these pails of water. It's not easy. My back is breaking, and you know, my wife has been sick for a few years. I mean, it's hard. I have two daughters to marry off. I can't find them a shidduch. I mean, it's really awful. The Baal Shem tries to talk him out of it, but it's not going. The Baal Shem continues to davening. The next morning, he meets the same Reb Zelig, and he asks him, "No, was macht Reb Zelig?" And he says, "Baruch Hashem." He says, "You know, I'm taka old. I don't have that much strength, but you know, I still could earn a living. I don't have to come on to other people. Most of my friends are already gone, and I'm still alive. My wife has been ill for a few years, but she's still alive, and we're there for each other. And I have two daughters. They're so talented. It's hard to find them a shidduch." So the Baal Shem Tov said, "Oh, now Nisyashvali Kushis HaTaisvis." Because Taisvis is Ksakasha, that it says on one hand that Mezoinoisov Shel Adam Ksuvim Loi Me Rosh Hashanah V'ad Rosh Hashanah. On the other hand, it says Adam Nidin B'chol Yoim. Taisvis asks that it's a stira. But now I understand how much one gets is decided on Rosh Hashanah, but how he takes it is a new decision every day. So the Cherus Olam is really not about the objective circumstances as much as it's about how we have the ability to be free in all circumstances. And that's L'maisa what Klal Yisrael showed throughout generations, that in spite of challenging circumstances, we do have that Cherus Olam, and we're still doing the same thing. So we could be toyim in the Lechem Oini, a time of Cherus. In other words, the bread of affliction has redeeming qualities. And I'll tell you why, because this Lachma Anya, we say, what's the connection? But you know, in remembering the past, some people remember slavery. So that's a reason that now they should be spoiled. Now everybody owes them because, you know, they were wronged for so long. Now they deserve to be pampered. But Yidden came out of the Golus. We remember that Lachma Anya. We made a promise that we'll make sure that nobody else suffers like we did. When we look at the Lachma Anya, we tell ourselves, we don't want anybody to suffer like we suffered. We developed a sensitivity by being in Mitzrayim, like the Pasuk says, that v'ahavtem es hager, v'atem yadatem es nefesh hager, ki gerim hayisim be'eretz Mitzrayim. In other words, by being in Eretz Mitzrayim, we developed the ability to empathize, to feel for the outsider, for the alien, for the misfit, and for the underdog. And that became very much part of the Jewish psyche, sometimes to fault. But the pshat is that v'atem yedatem es nefesh hager ki gerim hayisim be'eretz Mitzrayim. So when we say acha ken yetzu b'chush gadol, the Rechush Gadol doesn't just mean in material goods, but as the Arizal says, that it's also in spiritual goods. In other words, the spiritual goods that we took out of Mitzrayim, which the Torah refers to in Parshas V'eschan as the Kur HaBarzel, which is where we're Mezachech the Zov, we became better people. The Rechush Gadol, part of the Rechush Gadol is the Va'atem Yedatem Es Nefesh Hager Ki Gerim Hayisim Be'eretz Mitzrayim, that we have a feeling to reach out to the outsider, to the underdog, to the underprivileged. And Memela, we see the redeeming qualities in the bread of affliction. We look at that Lachma Anya and we say, Kol Dichfin Yesev Yechel. Okay, Rabbi Say, I think I'm going to leave the rest to you, leave you to your own devices.